Merry Christmuhus fuckers tie-he. Here is some cancer for all you gays to enjoy.
Which is what white people are. They're fucking aliens. They're fucking parasites.
But let me say this, black people cannot be racist.
They're fucking soulless monsters.
Right, well, nobody has to save you because you're a fucking white man who gets to do whatever he wants to in this space, right? Okay. So I'm saying, no, you do not have permission to walk around videotaping women of color and acting like you can do that and the rest of us can't.
All white people are racist, all men are misogynistic, all cisgender people are transphobic, all members of a majority are biased against the members of the minority.
Aren't you quite aware by holding that video camera on me that you are surrounded by your privilege, right? Take your privilege somewhere else, please. All right? Because your privilege is not welcome here. So unless you are here to dismantle your privilege, please find somewhere else to go.
So I can be a Chinese woman.
You sure.
But I can't be a 6'5" Chinese woman.
Yes.
Now, Philip Davis, the Conservative MP and well-known campaigner for men's rights, is set to join the Women and Equalities Committee in Parliament. Now, that's raised a few eyebrows, not because Philip Davis is a man. There are already 2 of them on the committee, but because Mr Davis has previously derided what he calls militant feminists. And he even described the creation of the Women and Equalities Committee as depressing. Well, Philip Davis joins me now from Central Lobby, as does the co-leader of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas. Welcome to both of you. Philip Davis, if you think the committee's depressing, why are you joining it?
Well, the committee's there whether I like it or not, so if I can bring some common sense to the committee, that's surely a good thing, just in the same way that UKIP used to take their seats in the EU Parliament, not because they were fans of the EU Parliament or everything that it represented, but because they hoped to hold it to account. And
But they didn't just want to hold. Well, they didn't just want to hold it to account. They wanted to actually end our involvement in the Parliament. Is that what you're going to do with this committee? Try and bring it down, break it up?
Well, I'd prefer it if it was just called the Equalities Committee. I don't see why it needs to be called the Women and Equalities Committee. You can still look at women's issues on a committee that's just called Equalities, but it seems to indicate that there are no issues for men, and clearly there are issues where men suffer. So I don't really see why it can't just be called the Equalities Committee.
Right. Well, what do you think about that, Caroline?
Well, I hope that the time that he spends on the committee will be an opportunity for him to understand a bit more about entrenched sexism in our society. So this is an MP who has been saying, as you said, that this committee shouldn't even exist, that it was disappointing that it was going ahead, and yet he's now hoping to take his position on it. And I just think that we need MPs on that committee who recognise, for example, the level of the gender pay gap, who recognise the disproportionate violence against women, who recognise that there's still a very long way to go in business, in politics, in just about every sphere of life, where women are discriminated against and where we need to have concerted effort to support women.
Right.
I'm certainly not against having actions to support men, and Philip does a good job doing that, but let him do that in his work there and let the Women's and Equalities Party carry on, rather than having him, a person who says that he's taking his lead from UKIP in the European Parliament. As we know, they're trying to bring down the presence of the European Parliament. That's not a very good precedent for the Women and Equalities Party.
Do you understand the issues of entrenched sexism, Philip Davis, as Caroline Lucas has just outlined, the gender pay gap, violence against women? Do you understand those issues?
Yes, absolutely. There are massive issues that affect women. There is a gender pay gap. There's also a part-time gender pay gap where women are paid more than men. Yes, many women, 2/3 of victims of domestic violence are women, but 1/3 of victims are men. So what I'm saying is, of course there are issues that affect women and they should be tackled on the committee, but equally there are issues that affect men, and I don't see why they should be excluded from having their views on what is supposed to be an equalities committee. I believe in equality where gender should be irrelevant, and that's what I want to try and bring to the committee.
Right, and what's wrong with that, Caroline?
Well, when we have a society where women and men are equally represented in the different spheres of power in this country, then I think that's the time for the debate that Philip wants to have. If he wants to go ahead, as he does, and organise to raise issues around men's equality and issues around very serious issues about suicide rates for men and so forth, then by all means, please go and do that. we support that. But to have a presence on the committee who doesn't even believe the committee should exist, to have a presence who thinks that this is about feminist zealots, as he's put it, that to me doesn't suggest that this is going to be a very constructive contribution to the work of the committee.
I mean, you haven't started off well, one might say, in the terms of the language that you've used. Feminist zealots being just one of the terms that you've used to describe people like Caroline Lucas on the committee. But also, you made a comment at an event organised by a group called Justice for Men and Boys. They run a Lying Feminist of the Month award. According to their website, the awards highlight the fact that feminists are whiny, gormless, toxic liars. Were you right to give a speech at their conference?
Well, look, I appear on the BBC, but I'm hardly the greatest fan of the BBC. And so just because you appear on a platform somewhere doesn't mean to say that that therefore necessarily means you endorse everything about that organisation. So if that was the case, I would never appear on the BBC if you were setting that particular barrier. People should listen to what I actually said, rather play the ball rather than the man. And what the point I made at that speech was that men and women are treated completely differently in the criminal justice system.
Right.
And I don't think that should be the case. It should be the case that men and women are treated equally when they go before the courts. And the only difference here between me and Caroline, it seems, is that I want this committee to be called the Equalities Committee, and it seems that she just wants it to be called the Women's Committee. I actually believe in genuine equality between the genders, between races, between sexes.
You've got a very, very
all
funny
of those
way
things.
of showing it, Philip, and I think what he should be doing right now, December the 14th, is to give us all a Christmas present by saying this was all a bit of a joke and he's not going to be on that committee, because everything he's just been saying does not convince me this is going to be a constructive presence on the committee. There's serious work to be done, work that's been doing around women and disabilities, for example, issues around the gender pay gap, which is still glaring when it comes to women in politics. These are issues that need concerted action now, and I'm not sure Philip's the man to help us.
Is it a joke, your application, Philip?
No, not at all, and it's very. I would have thought Caroline would be the one person who would actually want to protect people with minority opinions in Parliament.
The day that you were a minority, Philip, I'll come a white Anglo-Saxon man. I don't think so.
It seems to me that Caroline wants people on the committee only if they agree with her. Well, surely the whole point of a select committee is you have people on there with a range of opinions. Otherwise, what on earth is the point of an all-party select committee? And people can only go on there if they all agree with Caroline.
It sounds like you are going to get on there because you're standing unopposed. But of course, Parliament, any member of Parliament, Caroline Lucas, can block the appointment or election to this committee. Will you try and block it?
I will talk to others and see what strategies they're pursuing. In fact, I think we need to have a proper hearing with Philip and really just check out that he doesn't think that people who are standing up for things like equal pay or standing up for women in the justice system are feminist zealots. As long as he can assure us of that, maybe he should have a role and he could learn something by being on the committee.
All right, well, I'm sure you're going to get on really well on this committee.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight, the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Time magazine just reminded us it exists by naming President-elect Donald Trump as the Person of the Year. Fair enough, hard to think of anyone more newsworthy this year than Donald Trump. But to many on the left, Time's cover was a reminder that Trump is indeed going to be president and was therefore a trigger. Here now is one person who felt that way, Erin Crotty. She's a Democrat and former congressional candidate from California. Erin, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
The reason I want to talk to you was a tweet that you sent out after seeing the cover, I think, on the Today Show this morning, and you wrote this. Adolf Hitler was Times Man of the Year in 1938. Donald Trump is Times Man of the Year in 2016. Discuss. And I just saw the irony there because comparing someone to Hitler, of course, is not an invitation to discuss. It's the end of the discussion, isn't it?
Well, I think that there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from the 1930s and Nazi Germany, not to say that this is the identical situation, but there's a lot to be gained from looking back, how we cannot make the same mistakes of the past.
Huh. So what kind of conversation, I mean, describe the discussion that you were trying to invoke by comparing Trump to Hitler.
I think that it's very important that we are critical, that we do not normalize or sanitize the rhetoric or actions of Donald Trump or the ghastly appointees to his new administration. And I want people to remain vigilant. I want people to realize that none of this is normal, none of the hate speech, the hate crimes that are spiking in the United States. And we, as the American people, have to hold our president-elect accountable.
Okay. So you've made a lot of pretty general statements. And by the way, I don't think there's any danger of Trump going uncriticized during his term as president.
Well, I think that something like hearing the way that the media...
You just compared him to Hitler now. So, I mean, clearly there's, a vigorous conversation about Trump underway, and you're part of it. But you said his ghastly appointees. Give me an example.
Today, You're talking about appointing a head of the EPA, someone who has sued the EPA on behalf of the coal industry and the coal lobby. You're talking about putting a known anti-Semite...
Who is that?
Pruitt.
Who is that?
The Attorney General Pruitt today.
And what was the suit about? Do you know?
Yeah, he was suing on behalf. It was a part of what the New York Times actually called a secretive alliance between energy firms, between state prosecutors, where he is Attorney General, and between oil and gas companies. And they...
So let me just say this. I mean, it doesn't sound like you know a ton about this, but he was one of 28 attorneys general. So the majority of states sued the Obama administration over its environmental regulations. So you can't just say he was acting on behalf of oil and gas companies. The majority of states were involved in that suit.
He actually appropriated text out of a letter written by the oil and gas companies as his own.
Right. So what about that did you disagree? In other words, so what you're doing here is you're quoting out of context of a New York Times piece that says because he has the same views as an oil and gas company, they're illegitimate, but you're not actually making the case against him. And that, I guess, is what bothers me. I think there are a lot of cases to be made against Trump or his policies, and that's all totally legitimate. What is not legitimate and what does not lead to fruitful conversation or solutions is name-calling, and that's what you're doing.
I don't believe so. I think that someone who sues to remove protections that protect families, American families, from mercury, from arsenic, that protect our wetlands, that reduce the air pollution so that we can have a right to breathable air is not name-calling.
Nobody is contesting a right to breathable air. I guess my point, just to say it again, is you don't actually know anything about what you're talking about, and you're throwing out a lot of allegations as if someone were against clean air or for mercury. Is there another side to the case? Do you understand their position, or does that not even interest you, learning what they think?
It's not about learning what they think. It's about the fact that this man, who is the head of the EPA, the nominee, has already acted on behalf of these very things about which we're speaking. He has sued to lessen the regulations from an environmental and public health standpoint. That is fact. That's non-negotiable. Around air pollution?
No, it's not. You can't name a single one. I think, now, I'm talking about
three
I think you studied
ones.
at the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at NYU. Do you have a degree in the hard sciences?
I do have a degree in social and cultural analysis. I'm the proud co-founder of Turning Green, a nonprofit, and we've been working on environmental advocacy since January 2005.
What's so amazing is that someone can start an environmental nonprofit with no science background. Do you think that's a little weird?
No, I don't think that's a little weird. I think that there are a number of angles to come at this from. We partner with, and I'm proud to partner, a number of environmental organizations with sound scientists on their staff. 350.org, NRDC came out today to absolutely categorically call out this man for being a climate denier.
And maybe a climate denier. So anybody who disagrees with the received point of view that you espouse is not a legitimate critic
This
or raising
man
questions.
is
He's a denier
of the fossil fuel industry. He is a puppet.
Right. Yeah, I don't actually think you know anything about him or the suit, and I don't think you have the background to make those claims.
I can cite three specific suits: wetland protection, the air pollution, and the toxins related to mercury and arsenic.
What does that even mean? The air pollution? What suit is that? What law was he contesting?
He sued to reduce regulations around carbon pollution in the air.
Okay. So all regulations are good, and anyone who challenges them is an accomplice to Hitler's rise, is a denier. I mean, what you're doing is
No, these are conclusions to which you are arriving.
No, actually, I'm not making the claim. I'm merely saying there's probably another side to the argument. You seem wholly ignorant of it and not interested in learning it. And instead, you are content with dismissing this guy as a moral criminal. And I'm saying that that's not the kind of conversation that leads to solutions. It's the kind that leads to demonizing other people. And that's bad. That's my point. Do you not accept that? Can you see what I'm talking about?
I see what you're talking about, that name-calling and hate speech and toxic rhetoric is how we've derived at this point. We have a president-elect who has built a whole campaign cycle around it.
You just compared this guy to Hitler, and then with a straight face, you're going to accuse him of engaging in hate speech. I mean, I'm sorry, I can barely hear the irony alarm is so loud in the background. I don't want to be cruel to you.
This man, Donald Trump, has appointed as his chief strategist and top advisor, Steve Bannon. Are you going to tell me that Steve Bannon is not a white supremacist, is not an anti-Semite, that he is putting that very ideology in the Oval Office?
Yeah. All right. We got the hand gestures down, but the argument leaves something to be desired. Aaron, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it. We've got a lot of big news today out of Trump Tower on the presidential election.